Two wins in two more states for Republican candidate Mitt Romney, but does he have what it takes to clinch his party's nomination or to take on Barack Obama for the White House? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. It was another critical test for the men hoping to face Barack Obama in the U.S. general election, with two states, Michigan and Arizona, choosing their Republican candidate. In the end, former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney won both, but Michigan, a state with which he had strong personal ties, he grew up there, and his father was a popular governor, became a much tighter contest. He only managed to beat his closest rival, former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum, by 3%. Santorum has proved very popular with those who are the most right-wing of the Republican Party. The other two candidates, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich and Congressman Ron Paul, have been focusing on the 10 states which will be up for grabs next week on what's called Super Tuesday. The Republicans are competing for an overall majority of delegates. These are the party members with the power to vote at their convention in August. After another bruising campaign, one which descended into bitterness with Romney accusing Santorum of dirty tricks, the question yet again is, why has it become so difficult for Romney to close the deal?
We didn't win by a lot, but we won by enough, and that's all that counts. This campaign is about saving the soul of America. This election comes down to two very different visions of America.
A month ago, they didn't know who we are, but they do now. What an absolutely great night. I am so thankful.
So what do these latest Republican battles tell us about the remaining candidates, their ability to connect with voters, and how they might match up against Barack Obama in the general election? To discuss that, I'm joined from Madison, Wisconsin by John Nichols from The Nation magazine, and here in the studio by Ford O'Connell, a Republican strategist and former advisor to the 2008 Republican campaign, and by Faiz Shakir. He worked for the Democratic National Committee and edits the political blog thinkprogress.org. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Ford, you are the Republican. Let me start with you. Let's look at the contest on Tuesday. Very narrow win there for Mitt Romney in Michigan, a state where he should have done well, as we pointed out. He has very close connections in that state. What does that tell us about the state of the Republican Party? Is it the fact that they're just confused, or does it tell us that they just don't think that any of the candidates who are up in the running are someone they want up there?
Well, right now we're kind of having a battle within the GOP about which way the party wants to go. A similar battle to what we had in 1976. The question is, do we want to be the party of the status quo, or do we want to be the party of conservative ideals? And that's kind of what we saw with Mitt Romney coming out of Michigan. He narrowly won, and the reason why he narrowly won is because he's struggling mightily with conservatives. Rick Santorum, on the other hand, is doing very well. But really, Mitt Romney is now the front runner, although a weak front runner. The question is, coming up next week on Super Tuesday, can he win Ohio? If he can win Ohio and demonstrate himself to be relatively likable to Southern voters, he's very well likely to become the presumptive nominee.
I would suggest that it's a little bit of a deeper problem than what Ford suggests. He says it's about status quo versus ideals, and I think that maybe is a divide within the Republicans, but this practically is about Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum, and I think their fundamental problem is that neither of them are really fully appreciated by the Republican base. They each have deep problems in their own candidacies. Romney is somebody who doesn't inspire.
So you're saying the Republican base is not happy with any of the candidates?
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's a much more fundamental problem.
I think to your point,
let me bring in John Nichols. John, you know, one of the other things that we've been hearing a lot about these candidates, one of the things we've been hearing about Mitt Romney is that he's very rich and that he's failing to connect with ordinary Americans. I mean, he's seen as the very embodiment of that 1% that we often hear about. Is that the problem there?
Absolutely. He's a tragically inept candidate. Mitt Romney is not particularly rich compared to some of the super billionaires we talk about a lot, but he is in the sort of upper 1% of the 1%. And while there are plenty of billionaires, plenty of rich people who have a common touch, think of a Warren Buffett, someone like that, Mitt Romney literally fits the stereotype perfectly. He went to a factory in Ohio on the morning after the Michigan primary and touched a button to start a machine and said, well, I guess I did my heavy lifting for the day. And everybody stood there just with their jaws hanging down saying, you know, we have never seen a candidate for president who, you know, was so tragically, incredibly out of touch with the base voters. And this is not the base voters nationally, not just Democratic voters. This is Republican voters. It's a really striking thing. And the party's got a great big problem. He has the money to force his way through, but he doesn't have the personal appeal to ever close the deal.
Okay. Ford, has that become a problem? You know, he appears to shoot himself in the foot all the time. You know, with this, I mean, he had that $10,000 bet, you know, which was during a debate. Then he said that $374,000, which he'd earned as speaking fees, was just $374,000. I want you to listen to a bit of tape that we have here with the very rich Mitt Romney, you know, who's been accused of failing to connect with ordinary Americans. This is what he said on the campaign trail just a short while ago. Let's watch.
I like the fact that most of the cars I see are Detroit-made automobiles. I drive a Mustang and a Chevy pickup truck. Ann drives a couple of Cadillacs, actually.
Not as closely as some of the most ardent fans, but I have some great friends that are NASCAR team owners.
Okay, he was talking there at the end about NASCAR, which is, of course, the racing cars, which are very popular with working-class Americans, with blue-collar Americans. Has he lost touch?
Mitt Romney has a little bit of a language problem. And this language problem gets him in trouble with a lot of people. What he needs to do, given the state of the economy right now, is stick on the reasons why he's an attractive presidential candidate, which is, I'm the best to fix the economy right now. The guy in the White House isn't. And if he has to stick to that message, when he gets beyond that, yes, gaffes do occur, and it is a little bit of a problem for him.
But he's a serial gaffer, isn't he?
I wouldn't say a serial gaffer, but I definitely think the trees comment, that really caught a lot of people off guard. And I do think when he does talk about the NASCAR, saying that I have friends that are race owners versus race drivers or racing fans is not something that a lot of people can relate to. That's why he really has to kind of keep his verbiage, if you will, between the white lines and talk about the economy and why he's the best suited to actually be the person to help fix it.
I would suggest it's deeper than just a gaffe problem. He's got a gaffe problem. But the reason this sticks with Mitt Romney is because he's seen as advocating for the top 1%. If you look at his tax reform plan, most of the benefits that are derived from that plan go to the top 1%. In fact, the top 0.01% get $240,000 a person. As a tax cut from the Mitt Romney plan. You look at the bottom 50%, they get a few $100s compared to $250,000. So the reason why some of these gaffes are sticking to Romney and are building the image of somebody who used to work at Bain and made millions and millions of dollars gutting corporations, laying off workers and walking away with a bunch of wealth is because his policies and what he stands for is in essence the 1%.
But what America's looking for right now, though, is somebody who is a CEO, not somebody who sits in government life. And I think one of the big problems that President Obama has in terms of trying to get this, the economy back on track is the fact that he's not looking at it from a pro-growth strategy. What Mitt Romney's saying about the tax code is far better in terms of pushing America forward, and getting us back on track.
That might be true if America wasn't
I'll bring you in a moment, John.
That would be true if America weren't already economically recovering. Well, the fact that we have over 200,000 jobs created last month.
I want to get to those issues in a moment. Let me just get John Nichols in here for a moment. John?
Well, I think it's sort of comic to suggest that Americans are looking for a CEO. I've been in Republican caucuses in Iowa. I've been in all the rallies and town hall meetings in New Hampshire. I've been down in Arizona, been in Ohio, Michigan, I've been at Republican events all over. I've never heard a single grassroots Republican say, we're looking for a CEO. It's just simply, that's a silly comment. What they're looking for is a president of the United States. And the problem with Mitt Romney is that he comes off like a CEO. He comes off like the guy who closed your factory, like the guy who offshored your jobs, like the guy who stole your pension, not like a president of the United States who actually wants to make the country functional.
John,
that's why Rick Santorum also ran a footnote to the race is still competitive with this.
No, I do agree with your point, John, about the passion. I think the biggest problem with Mitt Romney really is the fact that he's not comfortable in his own skin. America doesn't care if it's a CEO or a rich guy. They want somebody who's comfortable in their skin. And we saw that with George W. Bush a little bit. The fact is we can say what we want about George Bush, but he was comfortable in his skin. And that's really where Mitt Romney's having an issue, because it's not just that it's hard for him to connect with people, it's hard for some people to connect with him, because it's very hard for them to understand where he came from.
Right. If you look at the contest that's taking place right now inside the Republican Party, I mean, very important word you mentioned there, passion. Let's look at how both these candidates, the two leading candidates, display their passion. As you said, Mitt Romney has a problem with that. Now, Romney has, Santorum, by contrast, has been leading Romney in opinion polls, even very slightly on Tuesday. But he's ramped up the rhetoric. There's a intensity that he shows that Romney doesn't have. Let's take a listen to what Santorum said on the campaign trail just a short while ago.
President Obama once said he wants everybody in America to go to college. What a snob. And we have a president who is uniquely weak in the face of evil. You hear so much about separation of church and state. I'm for separation of church and state. The state has no business telling what the church to do.
So, I mean, he feels very strongly about what he's saying there, but, I mean, what the content of what he's saying could be disputed.
Let me say that. The clip you just showed occurred in the last 48 hours before the Michigan primary. What happened is Rick Santorum was connecting because of his passion. He started over-talking issues, and that's why he lost. If we actually look back at the exit polls, those who made up their mind with 24 hours to go voted for Mitt Romney precisely because of that clip you just showed.
Put another way, did what he said resonate with some people and made that loss, far smaller than it would have been?
The way he said it resonated with people. What he said in the last 48 hours is the reason why he lost Michigan.
I agree with Ford. I think that Santorum would have walked away with a victory last night. He would have won had he not decided to engage in a war against college and in a war against John F. Kennedy. Both of those positions made him seem like he was totally out of the mainstream, somebody who could not go up against President Obama and conceivably win. That's his weakest point. People do not think he can actually defeat Obama, and with these kinds of gaffes, he's reinforcing that point. If he could just button it up a little bit,
some of the exit polling told us that.
No, it's true, but to your point, though, because the economy's not very good, and you can say we're in a recovery, but if this is a recovery, I'm going to need another recovery because of the fact that essentially we're down to 7 or 8 battleground states, and what we're seeing in the USA Today battleground poll is that both Romney and Santorum, believe it or not, are leading Obama. And that's something that President Obama really has to worry about.
Okay, let's go to John Nichols. John, is Rick Santorum presidential material?
No. I've covered Rick since the early 1990s. I've seen him in a lot of political settings. He's a very interesting figure and a much more complicated figure than Romney. He actually does bring in a lot of nuanced thinking as regards manufacturing. I don't happen to agree with some of his fixes, but he's certainly a much broader candidate. He touches on more potential bases of support than Romney does. The problem he has is that he's almost entirely undisciplined. And that comes from having basically performed his political life in the dark for the better part of the last 6 or 7 years. Nobody's paid attention to Rick Santorum. He's gotten very used to saying very radical things without being called on it. Now he's in the spotlight, and he steps on himself almost every day. The big problem for Rick Santorum is that he actually had the makings of a candidate who could renew the Reagan Democrat coalition, appeal to blue-collar voters who were conservative but who did care about manufacturing, about jobs, about some of these core issues. But when you're coming out against college, against John Kennedy, and against contraception, 3 things that poll over 90%, you pretty much disqualify yourself as a serious
Well, John, to your point, I do agree about his missteps. But what he does have going for him right now is that he's polling very well in Ohio. And President Obama has to win Ohio in the general election. And if he could be more disciplined, frankly, he's running his campaign out of the back of a van right now. He doesn't have a pollster, and he doesn't have a campaign headquarters. Obviously, he needs that discipline. What I'm saying, though, is given the current state of the economy and the way he relates to Midwesterners, particularly in Ohio, and on manufacturing, and where we are, this could still be a very close race with Rick Santorum in there. Granted, there are a lot of ifs.
Well,
But where we are as of today.
Let me say
do
this.
either of these candidates have a problem that they may be saying radical things now to attract the base of the party, but once it comes to the general election, no matter who becomes the nominee, they're going to have problems backtracking and all of that stuff because it's going to be seen as being too extreme.
Well, and here's the candidate that seems to have this problem the most, and what you're referring to is Mitt Romney. Because what Mitt Romney does is he thinks that he can speak a conservative language, and then he goes to talk to conservatives, and what he winds up happening is making conservatives mad and making independents mad. So that's the real discipline issue right there with Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney has to stay being Mitt Romney and try to keep the economy as the forefront issue. It's when he gets off that subject that folks at the DNC and everybody else can run tracking video, and it becomes a nightmare in the general election.
The evidence indicates that as long as this race continues, it fares poorly for Mitt Romney, that independents continue to flock away from his campaign, the negative ratings of Mitt Romney continue to go up, he looks weaker, Rick Santorum looks stronger, which makes him look like he's not quite fit to take on Obama. And I think that there's really a serious problem that Romney has, that if this continues on and on and on, he may be so debilitated in his ability to take on Obama that he may not actually be the best candidate for the Republican Party to match up against him.
What you're saying is,
I think that's a very big deal.
Yeah, and that's why I think Ohio, Super Tuesday, and the next 2 weeks are extremely important for Mitt Romney, because the longer this does drag out, John, I do agree with you, Mitt Romney lessens his ability to win in a general election.
And this is where I think this gets very significant, because Mitt Romney we are very late in the process for a supposed front runner to still not be able to get over 50% in a state like Arizona. Mitt Romney and the other candidates barely campaigned in Arizona, and yet Romney, who had all the big endorsements, had the endorsement of the governor and all the key legislators, couldn't even get to 50% there.
Well,
this is a candidate that grassroots Republicans simply don't like.
John, to your point,
it is a big problem.
I think that my party didn't recognize when it changed its primary rules that we were running at a time when an incumbent president was there. If this was in an open challenge situation, it would be very different. We would not be talking about this the way we are right now. The spotlight's on us because we're running against an incumbent. And how many incumbents have lost in the last 100 years? 3? Frankly, President Obama's favorite. But given the way he's handling the economy right now, he's keeping my guys in the game. And if my guys can make the sell to the American public on the economy.
Did Santorum make a mistake by focusing too much on social issues at the outset? Because I'm just looking here. Look, there's a Gallup poll that's just came out about an hour ago. And here we have the economy features, 9 in 10 Americans say the economy is the most important thing. Social issues feature right down at the bottom, 38%, one-third.
No, I do not think he made a gaffe by going on social issues. What he made a gaffe on was over-talking those social issues. What we had was 4 candidates who were very, very similar on the economy. And in one of the candidates, in an effort to break free from the pack, wanted to talk about social issues as a way to differentiate himself from the others. But, as we saw, Rick Santorum thought, this is a winning strategy overall, and he went too far. And because he was undisciplined, he lost Michigan, and now is really on the heels in Ohio.
There's a core number of groups that aren't at play in the Republican primary that I think that Republicans are constantly offending, that will cost them in the general election. African Americans, not a major part of the Republican Party, not appealed to. Latino Americans, not a huge part of the Republican Party. Women, single women, these are huge demographic groups. You could count Arabs and Muslims, a smaller group. These are all groups that Republicans are not talking to, but will become a factor in the general, who I think would flock to Obama listeing to what is going on with Republicans.
And to your point,
can I offer a notion on this?
Go ahead, John.
Just to offer a notion on this. You have to win the nomination to get to the general election.
That's exactly right.
Rick Santorum did the exact right strategy of focusing on a combination of social conservative messaging. A third of the delegates to the last Republican National Convention were evangelical Christians. It'll be higher this time. So he's speaking to the base of the party, the activist base, and also a real focus on manufacturing issues, a very, very good message. The problem is he got his mix wrong in Michigan. He needed to have sort of a half and half social conservative, half manufacturing, never let one get too far ahead of the other. Instead, he let the social conservatives become dominant. When it became dominant, he began to look like an extremist.
But John, isn't he going to have a problem?
Away.
Isn't he going to have a problem explaining that in the general election? He's taken some very radical views on social issues.
You got to get the nomination to get to the general election. Rick Santorum didn't have a chance to get anywhere near the nomination without energizing the social conservative base.
I can't believe
you have to look for your reference points here.
No, John, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And my point is because of the narrow nature of the electoral map right now, the one group that the Republican Party is over-offending, if we will, for a general election strategy is Hispanics, then followed by women.
Yes.
Two groups that my party needs to do a better job over time incorporating into the fold. But as it stands right now, the group that's really going to come back, they could come back to bite us right now, is Hispanics.
Okay, I want to change tack for a minute. Let's look at it from the rather from the Democratic view. You know, other Democrats sitting down there and watching all of this take place, you know, this kind of circus that's taking place on the other side, and sitting there very snugly, or smugly rather, and saying, well, we'll just wait this out, and, you know, this one's in the bag.
Snugly and smugly, yes.
Yeah, snugly and smugly. I mean, let's take a look at how Santorum or Romney match up with Obama according to recent national polling. Now, this is polling that was taken a week before Tuesday's contest, and those surveyed backed Obama with 53% to 43% for Romney. Against Santorum, he fared slightly better, 53% to 42%.
Right. I mean, the longer this drags on, as I said, it's poor for Republicans but great for Obama. I mean, they're expending a lot of resources on the Republican side, talking to a narrower group of people. Obama's out there going to all of these states. He was in Michigan yesterday, talking to a much huger crowd than any of the Republicans talked to, who were all jazzed up and fired up.
I mean, the unions were paying for his re-election?
Well,
I usually pay. We call that a fundraiser on the Republican side.
Them and many others, a core constituency of President Obama's, who he's delivered for because he's helped revitalize the auto industry in Michigan, and he should be proud of that. And I think that's part of the recovery that President Obama has been able to talk to about the American people. As people see in their daily lives, the economy getting better, jobs improving, the auto industry also improving, the healthcare reform coming into law. They are going to credit Obama, and they are. That's what these poll numbers reflect, do they not?
What those poll numbers reflect is a national voter. We don't have a national voter. This country is so divided right now because of the employment situation and basically social issues that we are really down to 7 or 8 states highlighted by Florida, Ohio, and Virginia. And the president is going to have to win those. Look, the president is not going to lose California, just like whoever the Republican nominee is, even if it were Sarah Palin, would not lose Texas. We are really in a sort of knockout, drag-out way with the way the economy is going, with the gas prices, and with the way social conservatives are thinking, that, you know, everything's coming to a head. And the question is, who can win Ohio and who can win Florida? And when you show those numbers, that's not entirely true, because I can look back and look at the battleground voter and say, this race is a lot closer. And it is for the Republicans taking, but at times they do step on their own toes and they're hurting themselves.
Right. Everything is coming to a head. Let's look what's further down the road here. Now, this is a season of primary elections. John, I want to come to you on this. I just want to look at a graphic first, and it boils down to a competition for the lion's share of party delegates. Now, 1,144 is the magic number of delegates needed to win the Republican nomination. And according to our broadcast partner, NBC News, the current tally is as follows. After 11 contests, Romney leads with 122 delegates. That's twice as many as the rest of the candidates combined. Now, John, tell us what we should be looking for as we go down the road here. We're coming up for Super Tuesday, which is next Tuesday. That's when several states will be voting, and all the way down to the convention.
Well, here's the fascinating thing about Super Tuesday. Mitt Romney will probably come out of the day with the most delegates. It is unlikely that anybody else could be the front runner coming out of the day. But there's a very good chance that Santorum could get a significant pool of delegates, particularly in some southern states and in Ohio. And the thing that ought not be forgotten is that Newt Gingrich is very likely to carry a couple of states, his own state of Georgia, perhaps another southern state. And that means that you're going to have a split delegate count coming out of Super Tuesday. And that's a very significant thing, because the whole point of Super Tuesday is to sort of define a front runner. If things continue to split the way they are, Newt Gingrich is going to stay in this race. We've been talking an awfully lot about Santorum and Romney. But Gingrich will stay in. He'll have a pool of delegates.
Okay, John.
As he streams those off,
John,
that means that the race continues.
Thanks. Time's catching up with us fast. I'm going to give you the last word on this. At Democratic Party headquarters, when they're sitting around looking at strategy, how they're going to take on the Republicans, who would they like there to oppose?
I mean, I think that all of them look weak right now. Santorum would be quite weak on, you change your strategy per the candidate. Neither of them, I think any of these they'd be happy to go up against. I think the most difficult model is if Republicans go into a convention and then have a brokered convention of some sort, pick a candidate out of the blue, a Jeb Bush, a Chris Christie, who you haven't prepared for. I think that's probably the most scary model. I think it's also the least likely, though.
Okay. That's where we're going to have to leave it, gentlemen. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that is it from the Inside Story team here in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find out much more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.